finding, recruiting, and retaining the right high-performing, or as I've coined it, outperforming executive is the intended result of any executive search. And sometimes companies hire expert recruiters to find that needle in the haystack executive. And that's when companies from small to the Fortune 50 call upon highly acclaimed executive recruiter, Vivian Kessler. Vivian is president of Search Innovations, a boutique executive search firm that has this incredible portfolio of clients from top-tier companies like Vanguard, GSK, TD Bank, Lincoln Financial, Cigna, and Fiserv, where she has placed outperforming executive talent from the VP to the C-suite levels. And along the way, she's earned a host of accolades, including Forbes' Best Executive Recruiting Firms, the Philadelphia Business Journal Top Executive Recruiters, and she is a certified women's business enterprise. She is also a mergers and acquisitions attorney who redirected her career to the executive search business, which I cannot wait for our listeners to hear more about. Vivian, welcome to HR Morning.
Thank you for having me.
So there's so much that we need to cover while I have you, but we have to start by asking this whole pivot into HR. So take me back. So you're this highly educated and trained attorney who's working on mergers and acquisitions during your early career. And then you decided at some point to leave that challenging position for another challenging position, which is helping to find companies find the best executive talent. So what occurred back then? Why the shift in your career?
Okay. So when I was practicing law, it was, I found out early on how uncreative it really was. And I'll never forget my boss at the time. I was drafting some document. We were signing, we were putting two companies together. And he said, Vivian, don't get creative. Just take the document from the paperwork and just put the new names in and, don't reword it, don't re-anything it. And I think between the lack of creativity of practicing law and the lack of, and I'm sure that there are aspects of law, but I'm an early associate at the time. And between the lack of creativity and the fact that we were called in at the end of the deal. So all the things that go on to massage a deal, all the relationships that you need to build, all those things happen before we got there. And we're called in at the end to sort of hammer out the tiny details. And it just wasn't fun. So what I did at the time is I did informational interviews. I found somebody suggested to me that executive search would be a fit for me personality-wise, because a couple things. One, I loved looking for a job personally. I really enjoyed the interview process, which is sort of unusual.
Yes.
And the second thing was I really could suss out even then cultures of companies and distill it and think about it and think about how my skills matched the company. And that really was the beginning of thinking about executive search. So what I did was I set up, this is in the city of Philadelphia, informational interviews with it was probably 6 or 7 executive search firms. And the person had told me, only do retained, don't do contingent. Mm-hmm. So I met with the retained executive recruiters, and the word they used that no lawyer ever uses was fun. And so when I realized that it could be fun, that work could be fun, and that I really felt after talking to these people that it matched my skills, I went to work for 2 years at a boutique executive search firm. And when those 2 years were over, I decided to launch my own. I hadn't signed a non-compete, and I left and I launched my own firm. And that is 28 years ago.
And so it all started with the need to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
And
to
have a
enjoy
job.
what you're doing, which is really, and to match what you're doing with who you are as a person. And I have found that just in life in general, by the time you're in your 50s, you better be doing the thing that is suitable to you, that really fits who you are as a person, which is why I think in executive search in general, finding out who somebody is and who they were and who they became is really important. What their values are, what gives them a feeling of fulfillment. Those things are really important. And you really need to find people who are matching, their personality and their values with what they do.
And that's what makes you such a star in executive recruiting, because I think you had that golden nugget early in your career where you really figured out what you wanted. I think some people don't figure that out until their 40s or 50s, or until they're kind of in their second career.
Right.
So fast forward for us. So fast forward about 20 years. So now you have this incredible portfolio of clients and experience, really recruiting these highly successful executives into corporate America, really. So most of our listeners are HR pros.
Right.
If our listeners really want to be successful in recruiting top talent today, what are your clients looking for? And what are the executives, the candidates, looking for? Are they looking for fun? Are they looking for money? What are they looking for?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. They're generally not looking for money, which is it's counterintuitive in a sense. And people always think, they're looking to be valued. And some of that being valued happens in money. But at the end of the day, I think all people want to be, people want to be seen, right? And they want to be valued for what they bring to an organization. So, all right, let's talk about the clients first. So I think for clients, they are looking for someone who can operate effectively in their environment. And, some of my clients are highly entrepreneurial, super aggressive in style, very sales oriented, very non-hierarchical. And so they need somebody with an entrepreneurial spirit. And I'm talking about both smaller organizations and larger organizations that have that entrepreneurial style. And then some other clients are looking for people who are, let's just say, a little more politic, right? So people who really know how to smooth the feathers of those and socialize something to get it done. And a lot of times the sort of maverick candidates could be really great for some clients. And sometimes the very politically savvy, socially adroit person could be better for another client. And so the thing to think about, and really to my mind, is you have to think about the kinds of questions you're going to ask in an interview to determine whether a person is going to fit with, those are just like the extremes, let's say, to fit with either of those cultures. So you might ask about what happened when something that you proposed wasn't adopted, or you might talk about, the most frustrating things in your professional life, or there are a host of questions that help you get to know somebody so that you can determine if they are going to be successful in one culture or another. And I'll give you an example. So one of my clients is I always say you can't color outside the lines kind of client. And so they don't want anyone to go off the reservation, or if they are going to, they need to couch it and socialize it with the senior people. And it's very political. It's a very political organization, but they are very effective. So a first question I might ask is, what do you want when I'm interviewing a candidate, right? What do you want that you don't have today? What do you have today that you want to keep? And get an understanding of what's important to them. So, there are lots of different ways to ask those questions to understand what's important to someone. And, what was a big disappointment, to understand what is disappointing, or tell me about a time when you had a strategy that wasn't adopted, or when you went the extra mile. There are tons of questions that really help you understand someone's MO. How do they get things done? And sometimes you interview people who can't tell you. They cannot tell you because they're not. And I've had candidates who I think might be effective, but I know they're not going to be effective let's say in my client, where there's a lot of massaging that has to go on to get something done. And there's a lot of pulling other people in to get something done. If you can't articulate how you got something done, who you were able to influence, how you changed your influencing approach in order to influence someone who is particularly recalcitrant, you are not going to be effective in an organization that really values that communication and the gaining buy-in at the top level.
So when you interview candidates, it sounds like there's talent at the executive level, and then there's effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And you're really looking for both, but
Mm-hmm.
more so you have to determine whether that talent is going to be leveraged appropriately within the organization. Otherwise, they won't be successful.
It's so true because, I mean, I've had clients where, or candidates, I've had candidates where I listen to them and I listen to them talk about how they got things done. And I just know that there's a particular client that they're going to match with. It's like to me, what I think is so fascinating about executive search in general is it's really about relationships in a very extreme way. You're having a relationship with a company. And if the company doesn't see your style as something that can work in their organization, it's not going to work. And that doesn't mean, and I've declined candidates on that basis. I'll say, listen, this client is not entrepreneurial enough for your style. You know, your style is bam, you know, and their style is, let's talk about this, let's study it, or maybe they're very quantitative. Maybe it's a company, and you can think about this with people. If you have a relationship with someone who only can be influenced by numbers and charts and outcomes versus someone who there's an emotional appeal. So, you know, companies are really like, it's a collection of people that are thinking a certain way or operating a certain way. Like one of my clients is French. And, you know, I have been interacting with, you know, French clients over the years. Numbers. They'll put you on the spot and they'll grill you on the numbers. So if you're not a numbers oriented candidate who can, you know, show the spreadsheets, talk about the outcomes in numbers, and really be on the spot grilled about your analysis, your quantitative analysis, never going to make it. Never going to make it there.
Are there any skills that you're seeing kind of post-pandemic for executives that have changed over the years or that companies are looking for today universally across those that want top talent? Are there any skills that are standing out that you're seeing most companies are asking for today?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I think of post-pandemic, but I also think of post-technology. And post-pandemic is, you know, have you managed a remote team? Some things along those lines, or what your feelings are about working remotely. But I don't think at the executive level that is as impactful as what business has become with all of social media and just the fast pace of change. So, you know, a lot of my clients are looking for people who can build or can, let's just say, understand what's going on in the marketplace and respond. So there's a responsiveness requirement. And be it in an entrepreneurial organization or a very hierarchical and staid organization in a way, how you might respond to what's going on in the market might be different, and how you work it through your organization to get to make the response happen. But the idea of someone who can build things new, who can socialize them within an organization and can respond to whatever's going on in the marketplace. And that really, I mean, honestly, it's probably, you know, since, let's say, whatever, the tech boom and the bust, and everybody was looking for, you know, equity, and then nobody cared about equity, and everybody cares about equity again, or whatever. You know, there came a point where everybody was underwater with their equity. So now everybody doesn't care about equity. They want something stable. So those things change. But really, at the end of the day, I'd say the last really 20 years has been, how do you respond to changes in the marketplace, and how do you get them out How do you make it happen quickly within your organization?
So could I couch that under the skill of strategic agility?
Oh, I couldn't have said it better than that. Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that's just top of mind for us because with this podcast, one of the things that we're trying to help HR do is continue to get that place at the table, to earn that seat at the table. And one of the things that I keep hearing over and over when I'm coaching executives is this lack of strategic agility. All of a sudden, they find themselves from mid to senior level, and it's a whole different ballgame at
It
the
is.
senior level. It is reading the tea leaves of trends within the industry, responsiveness, how effective are you at leading your organization, operational efficiency. Senior executives, it's a really complicated, diverse job. And you have to be astute and good at so many different things. But when I couch it all under one skill, it comes down to strategic agility.
Hmm. No, I think that's right. And it's interesting because, I had a very good friend who I watched, grow up in the industry and knew her from the early years. And she was someone who, in Myers-Briggs was a J, right? She had her task list and she would create, she'd create a new recruiting program. She'd create a new, talent management program and, cross off the list, all these things. And she became the CHRO. And we went to lunch one day and I said, forget your list. Forget your list.
Mm,
Your job for the next 18 months. I know that they hired you because you could talk about your list of all the
mhm.
accomplishments, but your job now is to get to know the executive team and become the executive whisperer. Because if you don't know what's bothering them in the business, you are not going to be able to respond. And it really doesn't have anything. They don't care about your programs. They care about what they care about. And so I think at this senior level, what's so important is how do you become the trusted advisor? And how do you tune into really what is vexing executives? And, be it whatever, the CFO, the CEO, the head of strategy, whatever it is. If you if you don't drop your list and tune in to exactly what is important and worrying for them. And, I said, look, you need to go on a listening tour. You need to check in very regularly because you're not going to be a strategist if you don't know what the business problems are. And I think that's true just in all, you know, CHRO kinds of roles. And the people who really, it's a combination of valuing yourself and your business acumen enough, learning that business and learning those people and what they care about. You know?
It's interesting. I don't know if you have seen this, but some CHROs are now being considered for the top job, for the CEO position.
Mhm.
And it feels as if that's kind of a recent trend. Are you seeing that? And if so, like, what's your thoughts on that? Why all of a sudden a CHRO being considered for the CEO position?
Well, I will tell you that HR really touches everything if you think about it. It really does. And it is, for companies in the I would say like the tightness of the labor market has brought HR to the fore. And you really, if you have a good HR person, you really get to see their strategic capabilities
Mm,
because they're talking about, I mean, the war for talent. I don't love that terminology, but they are talking about how to attract and retain. They're talking about really being able to determine who is in succession for leadership, and if they truly are, what I would call the CEO whisperer that they should be, then it makes a heap of sense that they would be considered for the top position. And I mean, I think the people, especially in larger companies who are leading HR, are very financially literate. And,
mm,
I mean, I've talked to people and they're both financially literate, and I think executive comp really requires them to be specifically literate in that area. But they really do have skills that in years ago, and I was alive and working at executive search when the transition from personnel to human resources came about.
mm,
And I
big
think the
transition.
requirement to be numerate came about in that time frame. And so it's not surprising that they are being considered for CEO roles now, you know?
Mm, absolutely. So let's pull that thread on recruiting. a little bit more, and around the topic of DE&I. And I was reading an HBR article that 90% of boards believe that they're making good progress when it comes to DE&I, but yet less than 40% actually track their progress.
Mm-hmm.
Fewer than that actually make progress. And so are you seeing, particularly at the executive level, sometimes you hear that there really aren't enough diverse candidates at that level, that they really haven't risen through the ranks. I don't see that at all. I work with a lot of incredibly talented, diverse candidates at that level who should be sitting
Mm-hmm.
in the C-suite
Mm-hmm.
or at a senior executive position. So are you seeing that there's a lack of candidates? Are you seeing that there's lack of momentum? And if so, why? Why haven't we cracked this nut after 30 years of really trying to focus on DE&I? Why aren't we seeing more senior executives that are diverse?
Well, it's an interesting question and a very difficult problem, because I think that, you know, when companies value themselves or say whether they're doing, a lot of them think that they're doing something about it. I have some clients who have like a specific number, like we need to have 40%, diverse talent, female and ethnically diverse talent in our VP and above roles, by 2024, or they give themselves a deadline. And it's all about pipeline. So what they're doing is, the problem is that, they're sort of wanting to, let's say, break the C-suite glass ceiling, but they're not doing enough ahead of time to meet those goals. And so to me, diverse talent is best really resourced at that, let's say, director to VP level. And then you can cultivate them and make sure you're making selections that fit your organization. Because to bring somebody in at an SVP level or an EVP level who's a diverse candidate, to some degree, you might be setting them up for failure, because they will be perceived as a token, which is, not going to be helpful to their career. But also, I think the pool is not big enough. And that's what we're seeing, right? The numbers say the pool isn't big enough. But the pool, a couple of levels down is big enough. And so really the important thing is the planning aspect. Well, there's two things. The planning. So you need to be recruiting the diverse talent at that director to VP level. And you need to also have a culture. You need to have created a culture that is an open enough culture, because I see attrition from diversity candidates because they're not understood. They're not valued. They're not. So there's a lot of attrition. And I have had a number of clients that have been very disappointed once they bring on diverse talent, in the attrition of diverse talent, because it's not working. And part of it is really developing a culture that will make it so that diverse voices can be heard. And that is difficult in a very staid environment. It's very difficult to, it's funny. One of my clients that's a real DE&I oriented, they literally, and sometimes you think they literally go around the table and make sure that everybody says something in meetings. And I think they're really guarding against people not being heard. And they've been very successful in absorbing diverse talent into their, let's say, medium to high ranks. And they're extremely tuned in to the individual. And that makes a huge difference, I think, because in diverse talent, the expectations, the thinking, the cultural nuances all need to be understood and in the conversation.
It's tough, because that's one thing I found in my research, is that even if a company has the best of intentions and they want to hire diverse candidates, about 40% of diverse individuals have turned down positions because they'll be the only diverse person within that team, whether it's the C-suite, senior executive, because you can't, as a single individual, diverse individual, you cannot go in and change the culture of that team.
Mm-hmm.
The team has to decide that before you arrive.
Yeah.
And what I find so often is I get phone calls from women executives who are the only ones on the team, and they're having a very difficult time assimilating and really trying to gain some traction and some impact within the C-suite, because the game is very different than what they thought it was. They thought that they were going to be valued for what they brought to the table and that they were great leaders. Everything that we hear about as far as what great leadership looks like or great executives look like, they feel that they're doing that, but they aren't getting recognition for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things is, to your point about maybe one or two levels down, A, identification, but B, are they getting the right training that they need in order to accelerate so that they're prepared once they achieve those levels? So I don't know, are you seeing that some of your best clients are not only identifying top talent, but that they're actually supporting them through training and development?
Well, it's so funny because I think of training and development as, I don't know, I do think that it really does come down to culture.
Mm,
And the more open a culture is, and the less, let's say, dug in to the not invented here problem, the more let's say, a female or diverse candidate will have, the greater the opportunity they will have for success. Um, I think a lot of the training, and to be honest, that's like, I think beyond my purview to a degree because I'm bringing
mm,
talent in. But the key, from an executive recruiting standpoint, is to make sure that the talent that you're bringing in, that there's enough openness to the new and enough, um, you know, frowning upon the culture of, well, we've always done it this way, um, to absorb a new person with new ideas and someone who doesn't look like everybody else. And so it is up to the recruiting team to really engage very candidly on such topics with the candidate. If they really want to make changes, they really need to talk about it, and they really need to address it up front. And, same thing with anything, with ageism or whatever it is. You need to, if you can't have those candid conversations, you're not going to get the diverse candidates to be interested in you, because they need the openness, and they need to be valued. And if everything's good in your organization and your organization's great, what do you need them for? Right?
So are those best HR teams, are they talking to the senior executive team? Let's say the senior executive team says, "Yeah, we want more diversity," and they truly have good intentions there.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so clarify for me, the best HR teams are having that conversation before they even maybe engage with you on, this is going to look different. So you're not only going to bring a diverse candidate in, but the way that you operate at the table has to be different.
Well, I think it really comes down to, and maybe this is just my bias, but I think it comes down to the individual, right? To the individual person that you're recruiting. So the HR team can have these sort of broad conversations with the executive team or whoever the interview team is. That is what's going on internally. But what the most effective recruiting happens when the individual who's being recruited and the executives who are on the interview team are being made aware of what is important to those individuals and matching their cultures to the candidates being interviewed. So, I mean, everything from understanding, that they're moving their family across the country, or that they have ties to the area, or just little things like that, all the way to what is motivating the person. And, it could be anything like, well, this is a global role and their role is North America and they want a global, whatever it is.
Mhm.
So the idea, to me, the very successful HR organizations are having conversations with the interview team prior and making sure that they connect with the person's values, and they take what is important consistently. Let's say, so if there's a VP of this and an SVP of that and the CEO and whoever it is that are interviewing, that they're talking about the values of the organization in a way that matches up with the values of the candidate and in a real way. And the openness in the interview, the candor in the interview, you kind of can't fake it. You really can't. So you have to take what you've got and match it up to the candidate in the best way possible and be real about it. And look, I have clients who assign coaches to candidates when they first come in. Like, they'll do a full evaluation of the candidate, and then they'll identify potential weak spots, and then they'll have a coach who knows the culture really well and can help the candidate to acclimate to the culture.
I think that's always, I think it's always a good idea, only because I've never seen that fail the individual or the company. That's a huge investment, right? Hiring an executive.
Yeah.
So while I have you, I have to ask you this question. So when I originally wrote the book, it was to really help top talent identify some of the greatest barriers that they're going to encounter in corporate America as they ascend, whether it's mid-level, senior executive level. And what I found was that most often there was another individual, typically at a higher level, who was creating the barriers and attempting to sometimes, in the worst of circumstances, take those high performers, most often women and people of color, off their upward trajectory. And I call these individuals in the book, I call them imposter leaders, because they're not really leaders at all, right? They're kind of fake leaders. But they give the appearance. They're very, very astute. They're very good actors. And from a recruiting standpoint, the best case scenario is that you identify these people before you actually hire them into the organization. Once they're hired in, they become so embedded that, and again, they're good actors, so they can fool a lot of people. How do you identify those individuals who are most often narcissists or psychopaths or sociopaths that are going to be those people that come into your organization simply to fulfill their own ambition at the expense of the company and the people? Are there any tips or tools that you can give our HR pros that are listening to identify those people?
Yeah, it's so interesting, because to me, it really is about how well you get to know your candidate and how well you understand what they value. So let's say, I will say that narcissistic candidates often out themselves because they cannot refrain from the word I ever. And if you start, the thing that's so interesting is if you get under the hood in any interview and you really start talking to candidates about how they got their team excited about a particular endeavor that you wanted to roll out, or get behind a particular idea, they can talk to you very generally about things, but when you start to get specific, and you start to ask, so tell me about a time when somebody was not on board. Why weren't they on board? What did you do to get them on board? How did that impact the team? Or tell me about somebody that you developed professionally and who they were, what you identified in them that you thought would really make them great for the next level, what you did to help them. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a male leader tell me that he encouraged his secretary to get a college degree. That is not the answer that I'm looking for. And it is not an answer. It is, that person can be counted out pretty quickly. Right. I want to hear real tuning in to real talent and real professional development, as well as real pulling people along on a team. And I think, so it's questions, it's getting to know what they care about. It's getting to know how they drive a project forward, what problems they encountered in driving that project forward, whether they abandoned ship or kept moving. It is rare that you can really make up very specific instances where you either developed a person or where you got the team all, making something happen together. You need to interview in a very specific way. And I do love the behavioral interviewing for that reason, because it really does make people identify situations, because past performance is an indication of future returns, right?
It
And
is, unlike investments.
yes,
Yes.
exactly. So to my mind, if you can get somebody to tell you, 3 problems over the course of a 10-year career, and how they got their team on track, and how they promoted this person, and how they developed this person, then you're screening out the narcissist. And I mean, if they're saying, because they can't get that specific if they don't really have, it in terms of the capability to bring a team together. That's one. Second thing is, and it's interesting because a lot of my clients have gone away from reference checking, which I think is a huge mistake. Not because references who are identified as your reference aren't going to say glowing things about you, but once again, interview the reference. To me, the question is, tell me about, this person as a leader. Rank them among other leaders. Rank them among other people for whom you've worked. Rank them among people who are your peers. What is it about them? Give me 5 traits about them that make them successful. Or, the more specific you get in questioning the reference, the better data you'll have about whether this person is a narcissist. Like, to me, one of the best answers was, this woman was promoted over me, and I was so upset. And so here I am, I'm on the team now, and now I work for her. She was my peer. And after 6 months, I thought to myself, I get it. I know why she was promoted. She's great. And she brought out the best in me. Now that to me is a phenomenal reference. And I think to really understand the relationships between the reference and the person, and to understand what the person brings to the table, rather than are they good, are they not good,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. So we have this thing at the end of our podcast called rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So these are 1-sentence questions that we ask our guests, and with 1-sentence answers.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who are listening, if you have any questions for future guests that you'd like us to ask, certainly put them in the comments. But was wondering if you were willing and ready to do them
Lay
with
it on
me.
me. I hope I can answer.
All right, let's do this.
Okay.
All right. So first question is, what book have you read that has had the most positive impact on your life?
I'm going to give you a recent one, The Expectation Effect. I think it's David Robson. And
Okay.
it's really The Expectation Effect. I highly recommend it. And it's a very interesting way to tweak little things that you're doing in your life to maximize your experience of life in general.
If you could give one piece of advice to an early career individual with big aspirations, what would you tell them?
Find your passion.
Your favorite activity to unwind or to recenter?
I would say in the summer, kayak, and in the winter, fireplace and a good book.
Greatest challenges that ended up being the best tipping point in your career?
I think the biggest challenge was how to communicate about culture to the people on your team so that they can recruit candidates who really match the culture. How I dealt with that, how I fixed that, I ended up doing a lot of, I had them identify and initially recruit, and ended up engaging much more hands-on with candidates from the very beginning of the search.
So Vivian, how can our listeners get in touch with you or find out more about you?
My email is vkessler@searchinnovations with an S on the end.com. Or they can call my cell if they want to. But I might not pick up if it's not identified. So probably best is vkessler@searchinnovations.com.
vkessler@searchinnovations.com. Got it.
It's at the Kessler with 2 S's.
Vivian, thank you so much for sharing your insight, your knowledge, and your wisdom with our listeners today.
Thank you for having me, Berta. Take care.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for watching. We would love it if you shared your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed in the comments below. And if you got value from the video, it would mean the world to us if you hit the like button and subscribe to the HR Morning channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Voices of HR.